So why don't we switch gears and go kind of more internal, chapter internal. So Gabe from Chicago and Melissa from North Carolina are going to talk about developing a strong leadership team from a distance. So Gabe and Melissa, take it away.
Thanks, Adam. And it's Northern California.
What did I say?
North Carolina.
Oh, Northern California. I see NC and it just like Northern California. I made that mistake earlier and then I was like, no, I have to remember not to make the mistake. And I made the mistake.
We should figure out our initials a little bit better.
All right, thank you very much, Adam. As he mentioned, Melissa and I are going to be talking about developing a strong leadership team from a distance. So I guess I'll kick us off. My name is Gabriel Coronado. I'm the current president of JETAA Chicago, which serves all of Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. I was an ALT at an agricultural high school in Miyazaki Prefecture from 2007 to 2008, after which I returned to Chicago and started a different professional journey. I am now the director of operations for an event management company in Chicago, and I have over the last 10 years organized everything from street festivals to black tie galas, outdoor sporting events to week-long consumer trade shows with upwards of 45,000 attendees. As you can imagine, a lot of those skills are going without exercise right now, but I currently spend most of my time focusing on growing the nonprofit arm of that organization. So thank you for having me.
And I'm Melissa. I'm the president of the Northern California and Nevada chapter. I was a junior high and elementary school ALT in Hokkaido from 2007 to 2012. I'm originally from Oregon and departed for JET from Portland, but ended up moving to Monterey, California for grad school after JET, and I'm still here. So I joined JETAANC as the secretary of the executive committee last fall and took on the president's role from August. So when Gabe and I were discussing our approach to developing resilient leadership teams, we identified two factors that have been critical for both of us: well-structured transitions to set leadership teams up for success, and accessibility of leadership opportunities to our members. During this session, we'll dive a little deeper into each of these topics. We also wanted to make the session more interactive and crowdsource our collective knowledge and resources. So I'll pass it off to Gabe to get us started with our first activity.
Sure. Thank you, Melissa. So I'm going to switch the screen that I'm sharing right now. If anyone has attended any of Chicago's events over the last few months, you'll be very familiar with menti.com. It's a platform that we really enjoy as a conversation starter, as an icebreaker tool, and it's been really great for us. So we are going to use it. So you can go to menti.com, and that's on your phone or in another browser window, and you can type in this code that's at the top of the window I'm sharing. So the code is 1286881. And you can see that right on the screen, like I mentioned earlier. So the first question we wanted to ask, because obviously this is something we're going to be talking a little bit more about, was what is the biggest hurdle you have faced as a chapter leader? It's a ranking question. So you have 5 options and you can rank them from, I guess, biggest hurdle to smallest hurdle. But we'll open it up for a little conversation once the answers start coming in. Oh, there we go. Encouraging the development of new leaders takes the early lead. Always a difficult process for sure. The only thing I wish is that I could see how many people voted for what the point total is, I guess. Never thought about that. Creation of strong engagement opportunities. That's another tough one. How do you reach different parts of your community? Older Jets, newer Jets, recent returnees, even outgoing Jets. What's the best way to keep them all engaged? Oh, got a new leader. All right, so we've got 28 people that have voted so far. So I wanted to open it up here for a second. Anyone that voted for the creation of strong engagement opportunities as the most difficult, the largest hurdle that your chapter has faced or that you have faced personally as a chapter leader, could you give us a little background on that? And if you want to unmute yourself to give us your perspective, it would be great. I can't see everyone, so I won't be calling on anyone. Come on. I know Jet alumni are very outgoing.
Although,
There we go.
Sorry. Okay. Hi, I'm Mari Reuter. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the current president of JETAA Alaska. We are probably, I think, the newest chapter that joined about 4 years ago. And this is definitely something we struggle with. I think, number one, the creation of strong engagement opportunities ties in with maintaining communication with alumni, kind of goes hand in hand. And I think we struggle with both of that. We're always talking about our big ideas of events we want to do. And we finally recently submitted surveys to be like, okay, what events can we do for you guys that you would actually be interested in? Because, you know, as we're starting out, we get very low, we've had low interest, or people have responded but just haven't showed up. So we finally decided we should probably figure out what kind of events can we offer to get more people to come. And that also had a very low turnout. Our survey, like, I think we ended up sending it 2 times, just being like, hey, we would really like your input so that we know what you want to attend or get involved with. And yeah, we are kind of at a loss. And since we're new, we're just don't have a lot of experience, but also I think it's the whole, trying to reach out to members in the first place. And also the timing, I'm sure how long it took us to form our chapter has something to do with it. So you finally get in touch with some of those people who've been back for a while and, you know, they're just kind of moved on with life and don't seem to, don't see the, the rewards of being in touch with other people who have done their program. So that's kind of where we're at.
This is Stacy, also from the Alaska chapter. I can add on to what Mari was saying. We also have a couple of different demographic issues. Alaska has a much older base of people, generally speaking, and this is a huge problem in the university community, is that Alaska bleeds 18 to 25-year-olds because we cannot get them to stay in the state. So it's an issue with university retention as well. And because the returnees are often in that post-university space, we have a huge amount who just bounce back and leave Alaska immediately. So we don't have a large young base for whom JET is a very recent experience for them. We have a lot of people 40, 50, 60 around there who maybe went to JET when they were younger.
No, thank you very much for sharing. I know it can be, you know, Chicago even has done a survey consistently over the last 7 or 8 months. And I mean, we have a relatively large chapter, but I'll be honest with you, people don't fill out that survey. We keep putting it out there. We keep trying to, you know, source feedback the best that we can. But I think, at least for us, one of the things that we've tried to keep in mind is that even if we don't get a lot of responses, all the responses that we receive are important, right? And they're important to take into consideration because it means that one person felt engaged enough to respond to you. We talk a lot about the size of events, but you know, as long as one person or 2 people are having a good time and enjoy what's going on, I think that's what's really important, and that's what you got to keep in the back of your mind. But it's, yeah, I can relate to that struggle for sure. But thank you again for sharing that, both of you guys. We do have one other question that we'll go to really quick. Now that we've talked about hurdles, we wanted to give everyone an opportunity to kind of to celebrate the things that have been good for their chapter. So the second question, which you can keep the same window open, is what has been your greatest success as a chapter leader? You just type in your answer here, and they'll actually scroll across the screen so we can all kind of see what everyone has had success with. Takes a little time to type. That's okay. I guess while we're waiting, I don't know, Miss Melissa, do you have anything you'd like to share on this topic?
I think the fact that we're all here shows that we have some challenges and successes that we're
Yeah.
happy to share with each other. So, yep, looks like they're all popping up now.
There we go.
The fact that everyone made it to NatCon is a success.
I would wholeheartedly agree with that. Giving back to JET in a meaningful way. I don't want to take too long on this because I know we have a limited amount of time, but I'd love to hear a little more about that response, giving back to JET in a meaningful way. I have no way of knowing who you are. I'm just going to wait. All right. I can't make you talk. That's okay. That's okay. Partnering with JBS for larger education events. No, these are great. Community building, fun event ideas, so important. Better engagement for the community, obviously. That's something that everyone was talking about earlier. Revamping board procedures, very important, I think, especially as your organizations evolve and bring in different levels of the community. Collaborating and adjusting to the COVID, that's been a popular one for sure. Handing off leadership to a stronger council than what I came into.
Wonderful.
I would pat you on the back if I knew who you were. But that's a great one. So congratulations on that one. That was you?
Yeah.
All right. Virtual pat on the back, Adam.
Thank you. I'm super proud of Sam and all the other council members that are on PNWJA right now. They're doing an awesome job.
It seems like it. From a distance, it seems like it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for all your responses. I'm actually going to stop the screen share now and pass it over to Melissa, who will get us started with the actual presentation portion.
Okay, is that showing up?
Mhm.
Great. So to frame the topic of transitions, I'll share a little bit more about my professional background as well as my experiences with JETAANC. So after returning from JET, I, as I mentioned, moved to Monterey. Sorry, my notes kind of jumped there as the slideshow popped up. I moved to Monterey, California to complete my master's in international education management at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies. And as part of that program, I did a practicum capstone project with a nonprofit international exchange organization called VIA, which is based up in the San Francisco Bay Area. They were okay with me continuing to work mostly remotely, so I continued living in Monterey. And when COVID hit, it wasn't really too much of a change in work routine for me. And I was kind of used to working in the virtual space already. So one of my deliverables when I first started working with VIA was to conduct a needs assessment and design training for seasonal program volunteer coordinators for the programs that we ran in Silicon Valley. And this project really kickstarted my interest in setting teams up for success, especially when there were frequent transitions. After my practicum, I continued to work on several related projects until I was hired full-time to work on program operations. And then I was promoted to a new position that the organization made for Director of Operations about a year later. And because it hadn't existed before, a lot of my initial work involved de-siloing the organization and developing new tools and processes for our operations. And while the role encompasses many things now, I see my core responsibility as ensuring our team feels supported, has the tools they need to do their jobs, and knows how to use them, and works together effectively and efficiently. I was aware of JETAANC, but I didn't get involved primarily due to the fact that it was, most of their activities were located in the Bay Area. And for those who don't know, Monterey is about a 2 to 3 hour drive from San Francisco, depending on traffic. I helped several JET alumni friends from MIS establish a Monterey Bay subchapter. And when one of those friends became president of the Northern California chapter, she lured me onto the team with promises of being able to contribute to improving organizational structures and processes. She knows I can get a little bit obsessed with that. So she and the vice president, unfortunately, didn't have the bandwidth to continue this year. And due to COVID, we didn't have a lot of other people interested in leadership roles. So I offered to continue by taking on the president's position and work on strengthening our leadership support systems. And one of the main reasons I even considered serving as president this year was the shift to virtual engagement. So I'm a firsthand example of the benefits of finding ways to engage your members from all geographic regions of your chapter, especially right now. So the transition was a little bit rocky for us when we all joined last year, and we took the opportunity of knowing that we were going to have 2 people continuing and 2 people stepping off this year to kind of do a dry run of a full team transition and really think about what our ideal process would be. So in talking about managing transitions, I'm going to break it down into before, during, and after. Before transitions, you first really want to think about your timing. When is the best time for your leadership to transition? JETAANC's leadership transitions in the summer, but Gabe mentioned Chicago's transitions in the spring. Just figure out what works for your chapter and work backwards from there to make sure you have enough time to prepare, recruit, evaluate, or elect, and confirm your leadership team. If you've had a pretty smooth process, but you've been having a hard time getting new leadership members or kind of moving people up into leadership positions, it might be time to reevaluate your process and see if it's really working for you or not. And within that timeline, you want to make sure you leave yourself time for reflection as a team. Review what you've accomplished, what's been working, what hasn't and should be discontinued, or what could be improved. One tool to do this is called a retrospective, and you can search for templates for that online, but we'll also share one with you later. Also take time to review and update your transitions documents and processes. Each member should review their job description or make one if you don't have one and update it based on their experience, and then share it with the rest of your team for feedback. We didn't actually have job descriptions, so we wrote them this past spring. Since most of us are volunteering our time, try to be as accurate as possible with the time commitment expectations as well. Also review your recruitment and selection processes to make sure you know who is doing what, when, and it helps to have these steps outlined in some kind of checklist. You could use a Google spreadsheet or Asana or Trello. I think anything that is shareable and reusable so that you can maintain consistency between cycles is really helpful. And finally, leave yourself time for documentation and digital cleanup. We heard yesterday it's a good idea to do that as you go, but sometimes that doesn't always happen. So make sure that you take the time to do it before a transition happens. And also make sure to summarize your retrospective that you've done and have that ready to share with the incoming members so that it isn't something that just ends up sitting in some kind of archived folder and actually gets used to make improvements further on down the line for the next team. So during the transition, start with an orientation for your new team members. It's great if there can be some overlap with predecessors to transfer knowledge, but hopefully you've also done your prep work and there's solid documentation for new members to refer to and a checklist for onboarding. Once you've had a chance to connect as a team, remember to introduce your new members to important contacts and your community through your website, email, and social media. And that should also be something listed in your checklist and who's doing that and yeah, who's sending the communications, how are they going to be sent, all of that. And finally, one thing I think we all learned from our time in Japan is that ceremonial recognition of change is important for bringing closure for departing members and creating a sense of belonging and empowerment for new members. So take the time to mark your changing of the guard with a Sogeikai, where you can thank your outgoing leadership members and officially welcome the new folks to the team. And finally, before hitting the road, it's a good idea to take some time with your team to recalibrate your collective balance. Whether you have one new member or a completely new team, discuss norms for how you want to work together and communicate, discuss your availability for meetings and expectations for responding to email and Slack. Especially as we're all working in this virtual space, it's really important to set those norms at the beginning. Or even if you're all continuing and don't have any transition, but you're moving into a new cycle, it's a good idea to kind of take a moment to see if that's working for you. With new people especially, this is a really critical moment because even adding 1 or 2 new folks to your team can really change the team dynamics, and it can be tempting to just say, this is how we've been doing it and move on. But if you take the time to work out new norms with each other, whether that might require letting go of old habits or not, you're going to improve the likelihood of those new folks sticking around longer and feeling like integral members of the team from the start. So take time to identify your goals as a chapter, as a team, and as individuals. Many people join chapter leadership for the personal connections, but also the professional development opportunities. Discuss how you can support each other in achieving your goals. And does someone want to improve their public speaking, for example, or get experience managing a website or social media? Try to incorporate those individual goals into the plan for the year when possible, so that you all have the opportunity to grow through the experience. And this isn't just for new people. Even if you've been in chapter leadership for years, think about what skills you'd still like to work on or new things you'd like to try. Having goals for yourself and sharing them demonstrates that you see the new members as your peer mentors and accountability buddies too. And my last tip is just to use your time well. I think many people have experienced some burnout, or at least know folks who have. And now with all of us spending most of our days online already, you really want to make sure that you're using the face time that you have with your team members efficiently. Have agendas for your meetings that prioritize the things that you need to discuss in real time, and try to stick to your schedule. Take time to check in and hear how everyone is genuinely doing, and adjust your plans and expectations accordingly. Something I'm sure that especially those of us who are in the nonprofit world can relate to is that there's always more to do, but recognize that your leadership members are choosing to be there and choosing to be involved. So do what you can to set those realistic goals, and make sure that everyone feels comfortable saying something if it's getting to be too much for them, and discuss how you can scale back or recalibrate if necessary. So thoughtful transition planning and implementation will go a long way to setting your team up for success. And now I'll pass it back over to Gabe to share some best practices for sustainably cultivating leaders with your membership.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Melissa. Let me just share this really quick. All right, so hello again, everyone. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about my leadership philosophy and the importance of accessibility and transparency in leadership. I also realize I'm moving around a lot, so I apologize. I'm just standing because I felt like I would do better standing than I would sitting down trying to present. So hopefully no one gets seasick or anything like that. But I apologize in advance. I am going to subject you all to some of my JET alumni photos because I so rarely have the opportunity to use them. And as you can tell from this first one, I only ever end up looking incredibly photogenic. I'm not singing in that photo, by the way. Excuse me, sorry. So as I mentioned previously, I was only on JET for 1 year. When I returned to Chicago in 2008, I essentially immediately lost all connection to the Alumni Association for more than 5 years. That is a photo of me the day that I returned to Chicago from Japan. And yes, that is my mother grasping the front of my shirt as if she had not seen me in 10 years, because apparently the mean streets of Japan were a very dangerous place for her son. In 2013, I finally opened one of the many emails I received over the years from the Chicago chapter. I sent an inquiry about the election process to our info account, and after receiving a very encouraging response from the then president, Rob Corder, I decided to attend my first meeting. I will say that is not a picture of me at my first meeting with the backwards cap in the back, but it was pretty close. When you don't have social media, it's very difficult to find old photos of yourself, especially when you are not the one that took them. In 2016, after a major board turnover that saw only one continuing officer, I was asked to step into a leadership position. Of course, I said no. But after a long discussion with that officer and after a few days to think about it, I decided to join as the vice president. I worked to help rebuild the leadership for 2 terms before I stepped aside in the 2018 election to make room for other alumni that were interested in increasing their involvement. During last year's election cycle, I stepped back into the leadership when a second major board turnover occurred. That's a picture of myself, Tyler Blaze, the treasurer, and Laura Espinoza, the vice president. And I'm sure I will hear about the fact later that I cut her face in half. But it's a square, and I only had so much real estate. That brings me to 2020, where there are currently 8 officers on the JETAA Chicago board. And I could not be more proud of all of them and their time commitment and the hard work that they have put into building a better community for us, for the local alumni, but also on a national level, because now that we're all virtual, we get to do that. I appreciate everyone indulging me for a minute as I explain my relationship with the alumni community here in Chicago. I am going to stop sharing. I only have one other slide, and it's not for the end. I just kind of want to talk to everybody. So I am a relatively new voice in these national level events. And I hope hearing a little bit about my background will help to inform my perspective for you. In the 7 years I've been active, I have seen 4 presidents, not including myself, and 32 different officers serve my community. I've watched or been an active participant in several different strategies for engaging the entire alumni base, or encouraging new leaders, and helped to lead 2 major board rebuilds. Based on these experiences, I'd like to share my thoughts on the importance of accessibility and transparency in building a strong leadership. Most of my term has been spent in this virtual space, and these are things I've tried to consistently put into practice, but I think they apply to building a stronger community in general. So I hope you will find some value in my insight, and I hope that my Mothra carrying away Higashi Kokubaru Hideo is not too distracting. First, you have to take the lead and help set the tone for your community. That might seem like a no-brainer. Everyone on this call stepped into their positions knowing they were going to carry some responsibility for their chapter, right? But it goes further than that. I mentioned earlier that the only reason I ever got involved was because the president of my chapter responded to me personally when I reached out blindly. Now, I'm not what most would call a typical Jet. That small step was a bit of a leap for me. I'm not very outgoing, and I hesitate to join anything without weeks of consideration. But that personal response meant something to me. Rob actively made himself available, and he was receptive to my questions. Although his time as president ended basically immediately after I met him, my first meeting was the election meeting in 2013, his attitude toward leadership had a lasting impact on me. Your chapter's leadership from the top down needs to be accessible. Every officer here in Chicago has organized and been the face of at least one event in the last 6 months, including the 2 officers that just came on a few weeks ago. And even when they aren't leading the event, the other officers do their best to be there in support. It is not just me as the president. We all put ourselves out there to be active in the conversation, working to facilitate connections with everyone in attendance. That first step in engaging new alumni is in these one-to-one interactions. And often the strongest way to gain that process, or to begin that process, is through personalized and individual outreach. It can be time consuming, but it's important. After first speaking with the president 7 years ago, I felt like I clearly understood the expectation of me, which at that time was just showing up. Clear expectations for involvement are incredibly important when it comes to including new alumni and potential leaders, which is something that Melissa talked about very well. You cannot think that alumni looking to be more involved are just going to get it, because not everyone operates on the same wavelength. In the last year, I've sat down with each alumni interested in stepping into the board, sometimes for a few hours, to build a rapport with them and talk about what that involvement really entails. These conversations about time commitment and responsibilities must be had, and there is no better time than at the start. I and the rest of the officers in Chicago have tried taking this expectation setting a step further. We all agreed that one of our primary goals as leaders was and is the creation of a strong, sustainable community. But how could we do that in practice outside of running more events to try and bring people in? We're all volunteers and time is limited, so what else could be done? In February of this year, my vice president, Laura Espinoza, revived the idea that we create a set of written expectations for participation. After a month or so of back and forth discussion, we settled on the current iteration of our chapter's community conduct and agreements. I won't read through them here, not all of them at least, but I will put a link in the chat for anyone that is interested in taking a look. Our hope was that setting these expectations out in plain sight would help encourage involvement through the creation of a more supportive and inclusive tone that alumni from all backgrounds would be comfortable joining. And we have received a lot of positive feedback on them from people that come to our events. I don't think they are perfect yet, hence why I said the current iteration. I think there is always room for improvement, but I wholeheartedly believe that publishing the agreements was a step in the correct direction for my chapter. And I believe Laura put that link in the chat for everyone, so thank you, Laura. And for real, if anyone would ever like to share their opinions on them or ask questions, please do. President at JETAA Chicago, you know where to reach me. I'm always available and ready to talk. Second, the only way to encourage continued involvement is to foster investment in the chapter and community. And one of the only ways for alumni to be more invested is for them to feel like they are being heard. You have to be open to discussions, sometimes difficult ones, in order to strengthen your chapter and its leadership. The current leadership for Chicago is still relatively young. Only 2 of us have more than 2 full years on the board, and one of us came on literally the week that Chicago went into lockdown. Honestly, there have been growing pains, in no small part due to the transition to the virtual space happening while we were still finding our footing. Concerns about overloading ourselves, uncertainty regarding exact responsibility delegation between positions, the overall direction of the chapter's programming. These are just some of the conversations that have come up in the last 10 months. In many cases, these are complicated concerns that may not have clear-cut solutions, but we don't shy away from talking about them. Every officer on the board has a voice that carries weight in our discussions, and they know, or at least I hope they know, some of them are in the call, so feel free to correct me in the chat, guys, that they are encouraged to speak up, ask questions, and provide their insight. By encouraging each individual's voice, you help develop ownership of the decision that they take part in and build their interest in continued involvement. Third, you have to serve as the gateway, not the gatekeeper. Now, this is more general advice for open communication within your chapter, but I believe it applies to cultivating both basic participation and leadership interest. Years ago, before I ever joined the board, I sometimes felt like there were conversations going on at meetings that I had no part in. The budget was this unknowable and intangible entity that existed only for the chapter's treasurer. And events were only explained so far as in how it was possible for me to volunteer. There were barriers, which is understandable to a certain extent. I wanted to know more. I had to become an officer. But then even as an officer, it seemed like there would be additional barriers. From what I could tell, I basically had to be the president in order to understand the full scope of my chapter. And the current officers have been working very hard to change that. I'm a staunch advocate for transparency in the operations of your chapter. Depending on your chapter's setup, executive officers or more senior officers like the president, vice president, and treasurer usually have more access to information. We tend to be the points of contact for Claire or the country reps. Excuse me. And are often asked to make decisions on behalf of our chapters. Share that information when it comes in. Let your officers and alumni know what is going on. For example, our treasurer, Tyler Blaze, held a meeting earlier this year prior to the 2020-2021 budget submission deadline, where he went through the entire budget process for all of the board members. We talked about it for around an hour, and everyone was given agency to ask questions and contribute their thoughts. The officers left more informed than when they came in, with a better understanding of what needs to be done to secure funding year to year. This is not something that had been done before. Another quick example, I called a meeting when the NatCon survey came out. I could have just answered the survey and called it a day, but I felt it was important that every officer had the opportunity to chime in. I think it led to a productive kind of impromptu discussion about our chapter and where our strengths and weaknesses lied. Maybe I'm wrong though. Maybe they were just humoring me so they could get back to their evenings. From active alumni to junior officers, it is so important that participants at every level have a better understanding of what leadership entails, because it allows them to make a more empowered decision regarding their commitment level. If anyone would like another example of what I'm talking about, feel free to come to our open board meetings at 6:30 p.m. on Monday. That's Central Time, because the board opens up the discussion about chapter activities to the broader community. We are also holding a very casual Bo Nenkai after, in honor of our usual Bowl Nenkai, another event unfortunately canceled in 2020. So even just join us for a drink if you like. So I have just one more slide that I want to share with everybody. So let me share my screen here. So just a quick recap. Take the lead, but be prepared to meet alumni where they are. More specifically, you as a leader need to be prepared to change your approach in order to better encourage and support another alumni's engagement. You have to be an active listener. Support and development are not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. Be available, be honest about expectations, be active in your encouragement, and above all, be supportive. 2, remember that people need to feel heard and valued to be invested. Difficult conversations can be necessary conversations for success, and you should always encourage feedback. 3, be the gateway, not the gatekeeper. Be open with what is going on in your chapters, because how can alumni be interested in stepping up if they don't really understand what is going on? And my secret fourth tip that I believe bears repeating for every person that is a leader or is thinking about becoming one: leave it better than you found it. Matt from Canada ended his presentation with this sentiment from the first half of NatCon. And I don't think I should give a presentation on leadership in our community without repeating it again. Our goal as leaders needs to always be building a stronger community, and alumni will respond to that energy. As leaders, we set the tone, and that carries down through every level of the organization. And with every alumni you come into contact with that stays involved after you. So thank you very much. I went on a little tangent, but I appreciate your time. And I will pass it back to Melissa for the last portion of the presentation.
Great, thanks, Gabe. So at this point, we had another interactive activity to do with all of you. I would like to share my screen to show you the current situation, which is just kind of indicative of what happens when you use online collaboration tools. So apparently this will be available around, at the next hour, at the top of the hour. But basically, I'll share the link in the chat, and I'll also post it on Slack once it's up again. But this is a tool called Padlet, which is kind of like a virtual whiteboard. And on there, we had different categories of tools, resources, or areas of activities where you could focus on improving leadership, along with some pre-populated suggestions of things that we've shared today. So when that's live, it'll be, the suspense should be like, let's build up the suspense so that it can be really fun to enjoy once you can actually see it. But I thought we could actually just open it up at this point to everyone to share any ideas of things that have been helpful for you. I mentioned that we have a transition checklist. Gabe has talked about having a code of conduct. It looks like a couple other people have had that as well. Are there other tools that people have found useful? Or also, do you have questions about tools that you're looking for, things that you'd like to have, or examples of other people's templates that you'd like to see? So hopefully we can just kind of have a organic conversation about this for the remainder of the time.
I can start real quick. We'll have a breakout room at 8:30. So if it's up by then, you can go ahead and do the Padlet stuff then as well. As far as tools and stuff like that, the communication part, super important. I love that. That one of the things that I saw a bunch of success was getting everyone on one group chat online. The communication, like texting, and then it evolved into a proper Slack environment and stuff like that. So definitely like the communication part. I don't know if you have any other kind of communication tips as far as setting that up and making it easy to communicate with everyone, but making it outside of Facebook, I think, helped foster better communication.
Yeah, we've definitely tried to have multiple channels of communication. We have our Slack community is open to all members. So I think that's something that it might be worth considering. And even when our officers join, we have them join with a personal email instead of their officer email so that they maintain access to the Slack platform even after they're done. But yeah, trying to make sure that we have alternatives to Facebook. We use, our MailChimp mailing list as well to send messages out, I think is really important.
I know, Melissa, you talked a little bit about working to put together the officer position descriptions, and someone else had mentioned it in the chat also. And I think Chicago has been working on that for several years now, and it's such a complicated process. And I don't know if anyone, I would love to maybe with Padlet when it comes up in half an hour, maybe we can actually share like people's descriptions of the positions, because obviously every chapter operates a little differently. But I do think it could be valuable to see what people are saying about the positions, because there are still a lot of similarities. And I for one would be very interested to see what other people are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to share ours. I think one thing that I would note, and so it might depend on what the current situation is with your bylaws, but as we saw, some people have their job descriptions in the bylaws. I personally would recommend they not be attached to the bylaws. And I know that then that gets into a lot of issues of whether or not you can change them. But I think because the positions, the actual need for the people in those roles that you have might shift over time. So I think it is good if it's something that's more of a living document that can realistically reflect the need of the organization and the kind of realistic expectations for that person to take on.
Yeah, I 100% agree. The bylaws are definitely not the correct home for more in-depth job descriptions. Our bylaws in Chicago, I think it said something about the president had to send messages via telegram up to a few years ago. So definitely not up to date. But I think a living document for sure is the best way to go about it. It's also much easier to share with people that are interested because you're not sending your bylaws out to everyone that whenever they want to possibly join the board.
Yeah, absolutely.
PNW has the descriptions on the website. So it's just a little snippet for each officer, which is a good way to do that instead of bylaws, because it is usually a pretty daunting document.
Lots of sections, 1A, 1B, 5C. It's usually very interesting though, usually very interesting.
A riveting read for sure.
I see in the chat someone suggested adding not just about the time commitment, but like when is it busy? And I think that's really helpful. I don't know about everybody else, but we have a lot of teachers in our community. And so they have times when they are very busy and then they have times when they're free. And we try to kind of be considerate towards that if those people are part of the leadership team.
Oh, whoops, I'm muting myself. I think that's a really important point that you just made about like busy periods for the year. I know that was one of the reasons why we looked at changing our election timeline because the previous election timeline put us right before the typical career development workshop. It put us a month and a half out from our annual Shinenkai, and it put us in an awkward time between the budget request and then the budget recap submission. So the spring makes a lot more sense. But yeah, I think it's, and you know, talking about that with people that are interested, like what are your busy times, so they can make a better assessment of how much they can be involved is very important.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a minute left. Does anybody have any other questions?
I do want to just point out Bahia's note here too about referencing the job descriptions or other documents within the bylaws. I think that's really a great way to go about it.
All right. I guess we'll go ahead and cut it off here. But there, as I said, there will be breakout rooms later, and hopefully Padlet will be up, and you guys can take it from there. So, like any good 3-hour movie, it should have intermissions built in. So we're going to have one more break here, and we'll be back at 7:55 Eastern time and get the skinny on JETAA International from Natalie. So see you everyone in about 5 minutes. Again, thank you, Gabe and Melissa. Amazing stuff. You can't have JETAA without a good leadership board.